Oh, I think we're on now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've just put a message saying we're running late, but that's okay.
Sorry for the computer face, everybody. Good to be here. How are you, Rachel?
I'm good, thank you, Alexis. How are you?
I'm extremely well, and I must just point out that I've had over a week here at Stratty. And for anyone who's thinking about our retreat, you must just come. It is absolutely glorious and changes your physiology and changes your mentality, and so worth it. We will give you details at the end.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just thought I'd stick that in now. And we have a very, very cool topic today. Would you like to introduce it, Rachel?
Yeah, well, I noticed how relaxed you were on the phone this morning when we did our respective walks. I'm up the Sunshine Coast and you're on Stradbroke Island. And our topic for today came out of our phone call on our walk. And because we were talking about some strategies to manage difficult conversations and to manage vulnerability. So we've landed on this topic of vulnerability hangovers. So we'll talk about what that is. I think we actually all know what that is, that feeling of having let down your defenses, really been yourself, and the next day or an hour later or sometime you think, why did I say that? Or was I too much for people? Or what did I just do? And these vulnerability hangovers that we're going to talk about, they can be accidental. We may not kind of have meant to be vulnerable, or perhaps we've actually really made a decision to be vulnerable with somebody we care about. It might be our partner, our child, a friend, or it might be our boss if we have to go and have a difficult, courageous conversation. And then afterwards we realize just how real and honest and vulnerable we've been. And then I guess there's some residual anxiety, the mind kicks in and we kind of start doubting ourselves, did I do the right thing? All that kind of thing. So today I want to talk about your experience of that. Maybe our listeners can share their experience of that. And then, what can we do about that pre and post?
Yes, excellent. I really appreciated earlier on that you gave the definition around vulnerability involving some feeling of exposure, that there is a risk. And that's certainly been my direct experience. There's a rawness to it, a kind of an immediacy. And while it feels heightened, it's also scary. There is an element of fear within vulnerability. And I think the vulnerability hangover comes about as a result of judgment of ourselves when we've been in that state of taking a risk. And it's certainly been a very powerful experience for me to reflect on that vulnerability hangover, which I think people do relate to that feeling of you've put yourself out there, you've gone out on a limb. We all have to do it. Otherwise we stay stuck in our old rigid ways. We need to put ourselves out there in order to grow. And yet on reflection, I've got a client who calls it a post-mortem. She says, whenever she speaks on a board meeting, afterwards she analyzes and nitpicks and thinks about all the little things that she would like to do differently. And there is there's a pain in that experience. There's a suffering in that post-mortem, and even a shame. And that's the bit that seems to me to be avoidable. And I'm really interested in these techniques that we can use for ourselves to avoid that shame.
Yes, and I think we can cover off quite a few, but I'd like to really just build on what you said about the definition of vulnerability, which is a sense of feeling exposed emotionally and taking some kind of a risk. The risk is either that we might be judged, or we might be ignored or rejected, or in some way it's the risk of shame, as you said. The other risk we take, of course, if we're vulnerable, is empathy. So it's almost like empathy and shame live on opposite ends of the continuum, and vulnerability is the continuum. And if I'm vulnerable like I've been vulnerable with you as my friend, and I've told you things that I wouldn't tell everybody, and you've met me with empathy, And then my vulnerability turns into a kind of relaxation in the face of empathy. But in the face of judgment, it turns into shame. And that's the risk we take. We risk judgment, but we also risk empathy. And in the empathy, we feel connected and we feel understood. And so, yeah, if we stay small and we stay stuck and we don't expose ourselves emotionally, we don't take risk, then we don't get the connection and the support and the empathy either. So we need to be sort of careful in the risks that we take. And as Brené Brown says, make a list of the people we trust and what we trust them with. None of us is wise to share our most tender or vulnerable, feelings or stories with just anybody. That's just not being discerning. On the other hand, if we don't be vulnerable with anybody, we end up completely isolated, like Elsa in her self-created ice palace in Frozen, just not willing to be vulnerable with anybody about her grief and her pain and her feelings. So where was I going with that? The thing is, we do vulnerable things all the time. We were just talking before the recording started about just going to the doctor can be a really vulnerable thing.
I'm hearing that connection requires vulnerability.
Yeah.
And all of us long for connection. So we're all going to be vulnerable. Even the most together, stoic, stubborn individual is going to experience vulnerability because we all long for connection. So that brings to mind also our discussions around attachment and, needing that secure attachment for that level of safety and trust in order to open up and be vulnerable and to be discerning about that sense of attachment.
Yeah.
I'm a huge advocate of my 5 criteria, and I'm really explicit about it. And I do question in all of my connections. Some of them I know it's there, like with you and with very, very dear friends, but it's quite a rare thing to have that real secure sense within a relationship.
Do you want to just quickly go through the 5 characteristics?
So consistency, availability, responsiveness, reliability, and predictability.
These help us feel secure in our relationships if those things are present.
And therefore able to be vulnerable.
Yeah, therefore able to be vulnerable. Yeah. And then now I'm thinking of other times when we are vulnerable in different ways, because I'd love you to tell me a recent vulnerability hangover, because the vulnerability hangover that I've had in the last couple of years is, as you know, and some people may know, I've done a bit of stand-up comedy. And every time I've done stand-up comedy, I've had the biggest vulnerability hangover of my life. Just this visceral kind of post-performance terror, more terrified afterwards than beforehand. And I think that's because afterwards it is the post-mortem. It is did everybody hate me? Was it terrible? And so I guess I'll jump in here with a tip or a strategy. If people are, and then I'd love to hear your vulnerability hangover. If you're in your vulnerability hangover and you're beating yourself up or you're full of self-doubt and worry, what I've learned a really good strategy is to ask yourself the question, is there anything I can learn? What can I learn? Just what would I do differently if I had to do it over? And that's it. Don't ask any other question besides that one.
So what did you learn from your stand-up comedy? What did you learn when you asked yourself that question?
Well, I think I was fairly sensible because each time I've done stand-up, I've had somebody record me on my iPhone. I can't watch it for days, but eventually I watch it. Yeah. And I think, if I do that joke again, I'll just do it a bit differently, or I probably won't do that joke again. Just, but that's the only focus that I'm going to, or if I run a meeting, if I facilitate a meeting with my team at North Brisbane Psychologists, I always feel really vulnerable speaking in front of my own team, which is really not something I expected years ago. And after I've presented in front of my team, I always have a vulnerability hangover. But I stop myself from beating up on myself and I just say, is there anything I'd do differently? Sometimes the answer is no. So it's just the old monkey mind just doing its self-recrimination thing. I don't know. People may or may not relate to that. I think they probably will.
I'm hearing you say that it helps you to identify, almost like a self-assessment, just like you might do if you're giving an oral presentation, and your teacher would be quite objective, around what you need to improve upon. And that can help to at least contain the post-mortem to a constructive criticism rather than an emotional churning and self-degradation, right? Just very matter of fact.
Matter of fact. Yeah, exactly. Now I've told you some of my vulnerability hangovers. Give me an example of one of yours, Alexis.
Okay, well, yeah, there's daily occurrences at the moment because like you, being a business owner, I put myself out there, and it's intrinsic to my nature, but it's also hardwired into me from a young age. And I'm now kind of treating my dating as a kind of a business venture, I think. Not quite Excel spreadsheet, but certainly
a recruitment and selection process.
Yes, perhaps.
I always tell my clients to treat it like a recruitment and selection.
Oh, do you? That's good to know. I'm not the only one.
That's right. Psychometric test them and within an inch of their life, I say.
That's it. I've got to say psychology has come in handy when I'm analysing the dismissive avoidant types, for example. Anyway, it has it's really been hard to continue to make myself vulnerable. But I did have quite a breakthrough just today. And thankfully, it sounds terrible. These are all conversations, right? There's nothing more, but I had the opportunity today to just resolve 2 conversations that were left with vulnerability, with my withdrawal, and allow for a corrective experience. And thankfully, these 2 people that I've been speaking with are quite open and receptive as well, which I think was essential, because I was, as you said, able to stand back and reflect. I think that was an essential part of the process. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about the meta communication in a little bit.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think, there are certain conditions that are necessary for that ability to detach, being in a space, having some clarity, some journaling, some breath work, some grounding all really helped. But that enabled me to reach out again and ask for the other's experience of the situation. And that helped me to get out of my own story that I'm the victim, that I'm the one that keeps showing up and I'm not being met. And that was incredibly valuable to hear that, in fact, my withdrawal brought about a sense of shame in these 2 conversations. And that really struck me, because it's the last thing I want, right, is to cause harm. But It shifted me out of my own stuff to recognize, actually, by my overreacting, I'm subtly insinuating that somebody else is wrong.
In psychology, we call that the anxiety shame cycle. So my anxiety, how I react to my anxiety could easily trigger shame in another person. So if I'm very fretful and I go to my receptionist and I say, have you done the thing yet? It's not that I'm criticizing her for not doing the thing yet. It's I'm anxious, but that could trigger her shame, because she could take it as, Rachel doesn't think I'm very good at my job because I haven't done the thing yet. Yes. And it's similar to what you're describing. In your anxiety, you pulled away, which they took as a subtle rejection. And so our anxiety, the way it comes across behaviorally, triggers shame in other people. And then we can get caught in this sort of vicious anxiety shame spiral. Does that make sense?
Definitely. I have not heard that before, and that is incredibly valuable. So what it did ultimately was help me to own the fact that I made the decision to be vulnerable, that was a strength, and that by being vulnerable, in fact, it allowed me to experience a part of myself that I was ashamed of, that I had hidden away, and that was a really empowering experience. So I was really very grateful for these two conversationalists who were able to be gentle and not overreactive, and share with me the fact that they had experienced, I don't think they used the word shame, but some sense of having done wrong, even though they were just really responding instinctively. So it was awesome, really, really valuable.
That is really awesome. And you did do what you've just described as meta communication. And so let's talk about that for a minute, because I think this is part of what we kind of advertised about this live stream, was that we'll talk about strategies for protecting yourself in the face of vulnerability. Because as we said at the start, we don't want to be too excessively vulnerable beyond our abilities.
Yeah.
But if we're never vulnerable, we will be isolated in our self-created ice palace like Elsa. So we want to look after ourselves in the process of being vulnerable, which your story is a really good example of that. And meta communication is one of these strategies that we can use to look after ourselves, which is really communicating about communicating. That's all meta means, outside of. So looking at what we're about to communicate, or talking about the process of communication with the other person, can help, I guess, contextualize the whole thing. Because what can happen with the anxiety shame spiral is that, there's all these assumptions that get made. And then sometimes in established relationships, of course, assumptions continue to happen. Another thing that can happen is people are in different states. Anyone with children will know this. Your child could be in a good mood and you're not in a good mood, or vice versa. And so you're in different states. So of course, when you come to communicate, things can go awry because you haven't had that meta conversation about where you're at, where I'm coming from, and why I'm communicating this thing to you. Now, in the dating context that you're talking about, and that you're enjoying right now, you are enjoying it?
I said semi.
I mean, I say to all my clients, I know that dating is stressful. I can remember. I met my husband online. So everybody's vulnerable. When you're dating and chatting with people online, everybody feels vulnerable. So you can kind of assume that. Nobody doesn't feel vulnerable when they're trying to find people to date. In more established relationships, we get into habits, we get into, patterns, and we need to just check the context. So I'll tell a quick story about that, if that's all right, because you reminded me of this morning. It's a very short story. It was a number of years ago when I was first learning about shame and about meta communication. Yeah. And I'd been at the Sunday markets with my husband. I'd ran into some old acquaintances, and I was very effusive, as I'm wont to do, and talked a lot, and looked for all the things that I had in common with these people I hadn't seen in a long time. And on the way home, I can't remember the exact quote, but my husband said something that I interpreted to mean that I had spoken too much and said the wrong thing. That's the impression it left me with. And so his anxiety about that triggered my shame and self-doubt. I've said too much. I've done the wrong thing. But when I got a little bit of psychological strategic distance from that, I went to him a couple of hours later, and I said, and I prefaced, or I pre-framed the conversation. That's part of meta communication, is pre-framing. So I think it was along the lines of, hey, I want to talk to you about what happened this morning at the markets. And first of all, I want you to know that I'm not telling you you should not have said anything to me. I'm not criticizing you. I just need you to know that I felt feelings of shame when you gave me the feedback in the car on the way home. And I'm only telling you this because I want you to know. And I really wanted to be clear that my intention was not to start a fight or criticize him for criticizing me or any of that. Just that I was feeling vulnerable So I kind of set it up because I didn't know what state he was in a few hours later. He'd probably forgotten all about it, but I hadn't. So I pre-framed it with this meta communication to protect myself, so that he knew where I was coming from, to lower his defenses. I was lowering my own defenses by taking him backstage and telling him how I really felt about the conversation in the car. But I wanted to sort of see if I could lower his defenses first of all as well. Anyway, that was the first time I named my shame, I think. And it worked quite well in that instant. He said, okay, I didn't realize. I'm sorry, that wasn't my intention. You know, it was a restorative conversation, but it really showed me the power of pre-framing, of this meta communication, and of naming the cycle, the anxiety shame cycle.
Yes. Even asking, is it a good time?
Yeah.
And if it's not a good time now, let me know when it's a good time.
Is it a good time? And then mention what you'd like to talk about. I'd like to talk about that meeting we had yesterday, or that thing that happened earlier this morning, you know, like, so you're setting it up, checking if it's a good time, sort of flagging what it's about, and then stating your intention. You know, I just need you to know, I'm not asking you to do anything, or maybe I am asking you to do something. But yeah, we're setting up the whole sort of context first, our intention, checking on the timing, all of that, so that the conversation goes better, because we are taking an emotional risk. There's a kind of an exposure that we're putting ourselves through, and so we want to protect ourselves, because if the other person says, well, it's not a good time, great, we'll do it later. You know, like, I want to look after my vulnerable little heart and not subject it to anything, you know, unnecessarily harsh.
Good point in that, Rachel. You know, I know, having worked with clients with trauma, that there is a tendency, and I've noticed it for myself, almost a bit of a cycle, that when I am vulnerable, I almost put myself on the line almost compulsively. And this, you know, that there is a definitive need to be protective, self-protective, and discerning around when is it suitable to open up, who is it suitable to open up with, and that can be as simple as the preface. I've found that really helpful. You've introduced me to the idea of the preface, and I think it is important to get that feedback first. You know, so one of my conversations, for example, I kind of prefaced it with, you know, this is very, very new for me. It's a new place.
Yes.
And there's big feeling around it, but I should have really got some feedback that was acknowledged before kind of going out there, because we all have different experiences of vulnerability. That's what I'm learning. And it's not always easy to recognize it in somebody else if it's something that's really au fait. For me, it's hard to acknowledge that might be a big deal for you, right?
Yeah.
So we might not even necessarily see it. Sometimes being explicit, I think, can help.
Yeah.
I'm really vulnerable around this particular subject. There's a core hurt, or it's something that's, you know, quite sensitive to me. Again, that's something that you've taught me to articulate in my closest relationships, so that there can be that continuity, even that, you know, it's likely that if we're vulnerable in a particular setting, that's going to come up again. So the preface is not just situational, it's relational as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And most people have heard of Brene Brown's work on vulnerability, and she identified in her research 12 areas of vulnerability, and I can never remember all 12 of them. Okay. But some of them are things we all relate to around the body, and you do massage as one of your services, and so you must have seen over the years people who you do it every day. You know, you look at people's bodies and touch them all the time, but there must be clients who come, and for them that's a hugely vulnerable and new thing to do. And so as a therapist, you acknowledge this might be my everyday, but this is not your everyday, kind of like what you were saying before. Same for me as a psychologist. You know, people walk in and tell me their deepest, darkest secrets all the time. That's normal for me, but I know it's not normal for them. So the body is one. Our family of origin is another area of vulnerability. Our career and education is another area. Parenting.
What do you mean by this?
Okay. So issues when these are things that we can become self-conscious about, I guess. So we can be self-conscious about our body. I think everybody knows that one. We can be self-conscious about our family of origin. You know, if there's skeletons in the closet, so to speak, there's difficult family members who've had mental health problems or criminal histories or all that sort of thing.
Okay, sure. The sensitivities that we might carry with us that might open us up to states of vulnerability or exposure. Okay.
Yes. So there's 12 areas. I won't go through them all, but it's good to know that the research backs up the fact that there are certain sensitivities or areas of vulnerability that are very common. You know, in other words, it's not just you listener, you know, who might be quite sensitive around talking about your mental health struggles, or your body, or if you're a parent, you know, around parenting, that's an area of vulnerability. So I think it's really good to know that some things are more sensitive than others, and to know which ones, you know, you are particularly tender about, because as you said, then you can do the meta communication piece and say, I feel really vulnerable around this. And then maybe that elicits more empathy from the other person. And that's what we're trying. Remember that continuum, right? We're wanting to sort of stay away from the shame end and see if we can dial it up to the empathy end by choosing the right time, choosing the right people, and then being honest, taking people backstage and saying, I am feeling really vulnerable about this.
Yes, empathy for self as well as other is coming to mind. That was certainly a big part of enabling the metacognition, or the meta communication was, okay, feeling empathy for myself. I am in a vulnerable way at the moment for a number of factors. Empathy that, you know, that I was being brave. And then empathy for the other, considering, okay, well, yeah, as you said, there's vulnerability for both parties in the dating scene. And who knows, you know, who knows what their situation is. Even just to allow for that spaciousness, and empathy from both sides certainly seems key.
Absolutely. And Mia has left a couple of comments on here, which I don't know if you're tracking the comments there, Alexis.
I haven't been, but I've just dipped in now.
Okay, you might see the comment. Mia says, the conversation spiking my anxiety. It's very valuable, but wow, I need to dial in and see why these feelings are coming up for me. My chest, an interesting one. Maybe I need to do better in conversations in general. You know, I'd like to point out that I have a bit of experience going for me here. I have been a psychologist for nearly 20 years, and it's taken me many years to be able to have these meta conversations with people I trust and pre-frame it and be vulnerable. I certainly never used to be. And as you've been saying, Alexis, you've been learning a lot in the last little while, which is enabling you to be more vulnerable than you used to be. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, so it's like a muscle.
Yeah.
The more we use it, the more we learn.
Yep.
And definitely been in training. And and it's worth I'm really glad you raised that, Mia, because I'm sure our conversations do raise challenge, you know, within your own experience. And in fact, all of our conversations will have brought up vulnerability, just for the sheer fact of the topics that we discuss.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for bringing that into the room. And, hopefully this is a safe space in that the context is set, that we're here for the purpose of self-growth, and that you are free to share how you're feeling. You know, that is important. That builds that fortitude in the relationship.
She says, Mia says, it's not easy, but I think I can blanket this for this community that we don't judge. No, there's no judgment here. This is an empathy space, a shame-free space.
Nice use of the word blanket.
Hey, there's a good question from Sarah here, Alexis. Does it detract from the level of courage if being vulnerable with a paid professional?
Beautiful question.
My immediate immediate answer is no.
Yeah.
I've had several therapists over my lifetime, and I found being vulnerable and honest and deeply honest with them just as scary. Took just as much courage. That's
And
my
your therapist is a human. Your therapist has all sorts of feelings. It is no lesser an experience of vulnerability. You are building that muscle as much, if not more so, in the therapeutic space.
In fact, I've worried more that my therapist was going to judge me than that you were going to judge me, Alexis. So I think it's possibly sometimes even more of an act of courage, because opposite a professional, like think of a medical doctor. It's very easy to think that your medical doctor is going to judge you for, or your dentist for not flossing or whatever. It's quite an act of courage for me to say to my dentist, no, I haven't been flossing.
Well, Rachel, I'm going to have to follow up on your flossing. Flossing is basic day-to-day hygiene, girl.
Oh, see, now you're judging me.
I'm judging you fully. I will judge you every day for your lack of flossing, and I will build your vulnerability muscle.
So my answer is no to that question from Sarah. What do you think, Alexis?
Definitely. It's as powerful to be vulnerable with your therapist as it is with an unpaid person.
I think so. I wonder if we've got any other questions. I'm just checking here. I know we're going to have to sign off soon. So if you do have any other questions or comments, please add them now.
Teresa says that she is concerned of how others will judge if she expresses her challenges, which is definitely a state of exposure and vulnerability. I'd be interested to hear if you have any suggestions to yourself, Teresa, based on the conversation today, whether there are any tools or tips that you might pick up. And tip is such a skimpy word. A tip can be just a small snippet of information that you apply regularly. So
I love a good tip, Alex.
Do you?
No, I do. When it lands.
Okay.
Helpful. Yeah, I mean, it is. I think we need to go in with the self-empathy. I think it's good to take the other person backstage, which is to say, I'm feeling nervous about this. I want to let you know something, or I'd really like to share something, and it's hard for me and I feel nervous. And even if you only have one person in your life you can do that with, begin there, and then see if you can, part of Brené Brown's shame resilience theory, so we have to name our shame. We have to figure out our triggers for shame. And the last two steps to shame resilience, which is an important concept because it suggests we can't get rid of shame, we just bounce back from it faster, is to build community, to speak our shame, and to find people that we can trust. And that's the long game. You can't do that by 5 o'clock tomorrow if you don't already have that. But work towards having more people in your life who you can trust enough. I mean, we never know. Trust is an act of faith. Courage is an act of faith. I don't know if my partner or, my dear friends are going to judge me if I tell them something vulnerable. I need to just give it a try. Hopefully it goes well. Hopefully I get some empathy, and then I build my own capacity for vulnerability. So this is a long game that we're playing, as well as the immediate meta communication piece of, framing it up. I'm feeling scared. This is hard. I feel vulnerable. I'm not trying to criticize you. Please don't, take this as judgment. It isn't, sort of the other person needs reassurance too, because we're also anxious, actually. Like everybody's anxious.
Soft-bodied animals.
We're soft-bodied animals.
We are. Yeah, Teresa then says, I realize we all judge automatically. And that's fair and true. And judgment is a survival strategy in some sense. And yet when we're being vulnerable, what I've learned is that it's not my job to think about what you think of me. It's my job just to be vulnerable and to continue and to follow through on that. I wrote something about that today, and that was really the long the long-standing lesson for me, as well as this reframe, prefacing, pre-framing the metacognition beforehand, was the fact that I needed to back myself in my choice to make myself vulnerable, that I assessed the situation as safe, and that I need to fully stand in that and own it, and know that, it was a strong position to make myself vulnerable. And whatever your judgments might be of me, it's not really my business. That's much more to do with your story and your experience. And I don't want that to hinder me, nor should it.
No, I would like you and everyone to be unapologetically themselves.
Right. That's a running theme.
That's a running theme, isn't it?
It is. And the more that we do it, the more we connect with other people who share our values. And really, let's face it, we all seek connection. So why don't we all just drop the judgment and start being vulnerable and connecting? I mean, it sounds very simple. It can be in lots of ways.
All of us here can work on that. Obviously, there's the rest of the world. But let me, the article that you sent me and that I posted in the lunchtime post, but I'll post it again in the comments below later. Yeah. From alustforlife.com. She says, the stakes of vulnerability are not as high as fear whispers that they are. So often the mind builds it up into a much bigger thing than it really is. So that's the first take-home point. And the second one relates exactly to what you just said. And I'll read this quote directly. There may be no personal slight. It's just self-liberation from being surrounded by strangers who know your name but not your nature. Think of this as Darwinian natural selection. Those who connect well together will fall into step with one another and become more open. And those who do not will walk elsewhere. And it's okay. You don't have to be everyone's cup of tea. Not everybody's going to like you, just like you don't like everybody you meet. It's okay.
It's a sifting and sorting.
Yeah.
I have one more, and it's a fairly long quote, but thank you for the reminder of the quotes. This one is from an Irish journalist and philosopher, Ciara Hughes, and she says that if you're having a vulnerability hangover, so you've exposed yourself and then you're sitting in shame, reframe the blame. The world or people aren't rejecting you when you fall down the well of a vulnerability hangover. You're rejecting yourself on their behalf without even giving them a say in it. I really like that. She says, take a moment to consider that your protective, defensive survivalism may actually feel judgmental, dismissive, or aggressive to others. And that was the new piece of information for me.
Yeah.
But that is something you can actually remedy by kindly, gently, and with a solid effort towards compassion, perspective, and humor. Learn to wear yourself a little more comfortably so that others can too. And when I posted this today, a dear friend reminded me that when we open ourselves, we invite someone else to accept us. And that was really a really beautiful reminder.
Say that again. That's so good. When we
open up,
yes,
we invite others to accept us. So he said, in being vulnerable, you claim an acceptance of yourself and invite others to accept you. And there's grace in that.
Yeah, that's right. How can we be accepted if we're not showing ourselves?
Yes.
And the thing is, we all want to love each other, unless, the 0.01% of the population who are true psychopaths. So then there's not many of them. We all want to love each other deep down. And so if you don't give people the opportunity and the invitation to love you or accept you, then you are doing yourself that disservice. I love that quote. Thank you so much for reading it.
My sense is it's time to get to the beach. It's my last sunset and it's a date with myself that I don't want to miss.
Okay, let's wrap up then.
Adore you. Love your work. Thank you so much for joining us. Beautiful community. You're the reason that we're here. And we'll see you next week. Same time, same place.
Yeah, and we'll post some links later in the comments to upcoming events that we're running. How's that?
Perfect. Well said.
All right. Enjoy the beach, Alexis.
Thank you. You too.
Bye, everyone.